think it's fair to say I've probably been playing a bit too much Ark Raiders. But the reality is that I'm, inspired by the world of the game, even though I'm not a massive fan of the gameplay. So I wanted to start off by showing you some Ark Raiders world, just because it's kind of it's similar to what I'm going for. Obviously, not with the same level of graphical fidelity and stuff, but if you look at the architecture around me as I'm running around, this kind of structural, piping and tubing and concrete and stuff is perfect for procedural generation. And I know that Ark Raiders Embark Studios used a lot of an application called Houdini that I'll show you in a minute. So it's just a really good example of how you can fill a world, and hopefully how I can fill a world that doesn't require combat, because I'm terrible at it. And it can fill it with interesting stuff that doesn't take forever to make. So it can kind of be made reasonably efficient. And so that's what I want you to take away from this, really, is that a lot of the outside world in the game will be procedurally generated. And I really wanted to talk about the sort of two main loops of the game, right? Which is, the first loop is looting, and that's again sort of inspired by Ark Raiders, but mostly inspired by Mount and Blade. So that's the overworld loop, right? The loop that you work on, on top of the world, right? As you come outside of your bunker. And it's weird how Ark Raiders has got so many similar kind of concepts to the game that I was making in the first place. So the idea is you live underground, and in Ark Raiders they haven't really fleshed out the underground part, but that's actually the part that I'm slightly more interested in, really. It's just that I really like the loot mechanics in Ark. I like the sort of idea of going out and grabbing loot and taking it back to somewhere and making something of it. The one thing that I think Ark Raiders is missing is that there's nothing to build when you build it, right? You gather all of this loot and you can't build anything, right? The player base, I think, wants some social stuff. They want some base building. They want some reason for it all, rather than just looting and stealing it from other people. So I found the gameplay itself rather toxic, but I like the concept and I like the arc and stuff. So, I just wanted to sort of start off with that, I guess. So when I'm talking about procedural, I don't necessarily mean procedural inside Unreal Engine. So this is a tool I'm using called Houdini, which is a procedural content generator. And in this particular case, it's what's called a height field, which is essentially the thing that makes the landscapes in Unreal Engine. And so what that just means is that we can use the Houdini's really good quality sort of height field manipulation tool, so masking and things like making sure that we select particular angles on the terrain, or we can kind of, if you look at the sort of color masks here, ignore the lines, you'll see that there's things like what we call a flow mask, right, which is where debris is kind of piling up and water would necessarily flow off the slopes of the hills. And so this setup, again, you can see it's just it's a set of graph nodes that do a bunch of different processes, and then in the end we output into a set of textures. But this is a really useful way of doing the overworld map, because the overworld map itself, the sort of level design didn't mean to do that. The overworld map itself, this is just one of the sort of Houdini engine tutorial set of videos that I've been through and just tweaked certain things. So for instance, the hole is actually going to go down here. And what that means is that I can build the overworld map using these procedural tools and then import most of it as different sort of objects into Unreal Engine, and then apply a bunch of real-time modifications in Unreal Engine to get the sort of look that I want. And currently it doesn't look great. This is all kind of, testing content. But the point is the workflow is already there. I already feel, very confident that all of this approach is definitely going to work. So this is the world loop, as in like the outside world. And then the game loop is going to take place on a terrain, probably a little bit bigger than this, maybe 4 times bigger than this. And the idea is that you'll start off in your hole and you'll go out. It will be a bit more sandy and a bit flatter, but with some sort of hills and stuff on the outsides. And you'll go and, you'll find specific places that are already set up, but then you'll often encounter procedural ones that are more sort of runtime generated. So that's the overall sort of plan, right? The creation, the content creation side of things is actually reasonably well in hand for the sort of world and the geometry and the level design kind of stuff. What isn't set in stone yet, and what is a thing I need to work on, is how you encounter, because I don't want you to be able to see people that you encounter initially. I want you to have to scan for them. So I'm setting up a sort of scanner effect that allows you to essentially direction find, a bit like a sort of sonar in a submarine or something. So you'll get a direction and a distance maybe, and you'll have to figure out, do you want to go and investigate what you hear, what you're pinging, or do you want to stay relatively safe near the, resources for oxygen and energy and that kind of thing. So there'll be a bunch of essentially pipelines coming out of the hole into a central location, and then off that central location as a hub, there'll be a few more fixed locations. But I would say probably a good 80% of the locations you'll visit will be generated on the fly. So that's part of the process, right? It's procedural generation, but it's done at edit time. It's done at design time rather than at run time. So the place called the hole is essentially just that, right? It's a large concrete sort of edifice. This looks a little bit weird. Let's see. Why shading? That's what I'm after. So the actual geometry of it is relatively simple because it's just a big concrete sort of space. And this will be embedded into the terrain. So you won't necessarily see this from the terrain's point of view. You'll see you'll see a sort of representation like this. And inside the hole is the tower. So the tower itself, this is just a prototype that I'm sort of mucking things up and getting the scale right for. The tower is the thing that covers up a central shaft. I haven't modeled a shaft in here yet, but the shaft is the thing that goes down into the bunker space and partway down goes into the habitat. So again, all of these things are kind of work in progress right now, but eventually what we'll have is the tower, I'll model them in separate parts to be honest, but the tower, the hole, the shaft, how you get into the shaft from the tower, because obviously that's a place where you have to be able to sort of move things like vehicles in and out and that kind of stuff. The shaft itself, which is going to be something I'm modeling off, inspired by Arc Raiders. And the shaft will be probably quite deep, a long way down from here. And then you'll have the hab halfway down the shaft, and right at the bottom there'll be a bunch of bunkers, a bunch of big empty concrete vaults essentially, with an airlock between each one of them, so like you can't get from one to the other without going through an airlock. And I haven't quite figured out how I want that to look and how big they should be, so that's why I'm doing these prototypes to figure out the sort of relative sizes of everything. But put it this way, they will be big. They'll be big and mostly empty, and you'll have to fill them with stuff. So that's the sort of building loop. If you think of the above ground as the sort of looting loop, and then the below ground as the building loop, and below ground is your domain, right? It's where you live. You can choose how it works and what it does, and you can choose to craft or farm or build or mine resources. You can do a lot of stuff underground. And that's what I want you to sort of see, is there's a contrast between the isolationist underground part and then the more, I hardly call it social, but the more sort of survivalist, humanity sort of interaction side above ground. And that's what I wanted, that sort of dual loop kind of thing going on. So there you go. Like Houdini's going to be a big part of the asset creation system. And again, it's all procedurally generated. So once you've come down through the tower, about halfway down the main shaft towards the bunkers, there's this place called the Hab, or the Habitat. And this was what inspired me to think of like an underground cozy game in the first place, because even though it's relatively brutalistic in terms of its like aesthetic and stuff, and this is mostly just a big asset pack that inspired me, but it made me think, well, could you build a life underground? Could you survive? Could you feel like you were could you feel positive about it? And so all of the features that we're looking at, we'll be doing things like cooking, sitting down to eat. Maybe there'll be books to read. The point is to sort of build your life underground, right? There will be like echolocation sounding kind of things, so radio operating and, basically stuff to do underground that communicates with the overworld, right? So the idea is that there is a sort of tie between the two things. And so this is more of an intermediate location, right? It's a way of tutorializing what you can do underground, really, the sort of build systems and stuff. So once you're building in its sort of simplest form, then you'll open up, I'm not sure exactly which room, but one of the rooms will lead further down, right? So essentially you'll be able to go further down the shaft. And at that point, you're into the main base building area, right? The area underground. And I'll build in some kind of control system inside the hab. Because some people might just like to sort of live inside a hab kind of thing. That light's all wonky. I'll have to fix that. But the point is that you'll choose where you live. You'll choose how you live. You'll choose how much interaction you'll have with the world outside. And it's perfectly fine to just there'll be things like decorating and stuff in most of these spaces. What I'm thinking is that the really big underground bunkers are just big vaults, right? There's a few that are designated for things like human storage and animal storage and stuff. Especially the seed vault is a big one. But once you get past that, you can think of the vaults as like a really massive open space, right? A big concrete underground bunker. And so you'll be able to build whatever structure that you think is right for you. The only thing is that you're not allowed to, I'm still not decided on this, but the idea is that you're not allowed to have anybody else inside the bunker, inside the sort of seed vaults and that kind of thing. In fact, you're not allowed in the seed vault, really. So there will be, there's a requirement for the Guardian, which is what you're playing as. There's a requirement for the Guardian to protect what's underground. And so not just allowing absolutely everybody to rock up and come underground with you is a main factor. So there you go. That's the hab area. I haven't quite figured out what the aesthetics of the underground bunkers are. So I'll show that in another video another time. But yeah, that's the middle part of it, really. It's a connection to the bigger world through the tower into the hull and then into the overworld. There's a lot of layers. That's all I'm saying. Okay. So just to show you some of the sort of procedural audio stuff here, I wanted to show you this vocoder I set up. So probably just easier to sort of show you it working, right? So playing a sample up here through a wave player. It's generating, I think it's a sawtooth. Yeah, sawtooth. I'm modulating the sawtooth with the output of essentially what is called a band splitter. Let me just show you that sort of working. So the idea here is that you take one source of audio, which is a sawtooth, which sounds a bit weird. It's just a sort of tone. I'm actually modulating that already with a number of other values, things like noise and that kind of stuff. And it modulates the wave player, so but essentially, a monologue with the same bands, the same sort of audio spectral bands as the wave. So the wave modulates the sawtooth noise generation, and you get this what we call a vocoder, which is like pretty standard audio kind of thing. And the thing to sort of realize here is that this is all sort of procedural. I could play a completely different wave file and have it vocoded. I was trying to figure out different ways of making a robotic voice for the game. And it's also playing a secondary thing here for the music. Just, it's a WAV that I got in an asset pack. And I find it fascinating just watching the spectral bands. If I just play it for a second, I'll stop commenting while I'm doing that.
In the year 2057, a group of scientists and ultra-wealthy philanthropists held a meeting. At this meeting, they agreed that the planet would very soon become uninhabitable and devised a plan to preserve what remained of all life on Earth.
And you can see the sort of amplitude, the volume of each band visually, which I like a lot. So I'll probably make some kind of visualization of this data. Essentially make a Niagara system that'll, like a particle system that'll show this kind of stuff, or maybe a UI element or something. But what you should sort of see here, I'll just demonstrate by moving some of these volume sliders. Essentially, it's kind of like you can change a bunch of parameterizations, right? And all of this is available to Blueprint, so you can do it in code as well.
In the year 2057, a group of scientists and ultra-wealthy philanthropists held a meeting. At this meeting, they agreed that the planet would very soon become uninhabitable and devised a plan to preserve what remained of all life on Earth. Realizing that the plan had to be enacted in absolute secrecy, each member agreed that none of them would benefit from the plan. At an undisclosed location in a remote mountain range, they would build a massive concrete reinforced hole. At the bottom of the hole, they would dig a shaft. At the top of the shaft, a huge anchor-like watchtower would be built to protect the access to the shaft, whilst allowing observations of the increasingly toxic world around. At the bottom of the shaft, they would construct a series of massive underground vaults, each one protected by a series of airlocks and sealed off from each other. In a small number of these vaults, they would store the records of all life on Earth, as well.
So you can see that noise, it tends to sort of break the signal up, but also gives it a little bit more cut through when you're mixing against music and stuff. The saw volume is just the volume of the saw wave. Noises, I've got two different noises, one white noise and one pink noise. And then I've got the basic sort of sample volumes here, but with slight detunes and pitch up and pitch down. The point is that you can kind of manipulate all of these inputs. And to be honest, this is not a thing that you would necessarily do at runtime generally. I might use it as a way of processing audio just so I can do things like voice manipulations and stuff. You could do it for players' microphone inputs as well, but I'm not sure that's the right way to go. But, I mean, it's just a graph of processes, right? It's actually really, really nice, and I kind of like that thing. So I thought I'd show you another graph that I made just to sort of play around with a meta sound system. And again, this is essentially a synthesizer based thing. All of this is, you know, you can again parameterize it and play it in the world. You know, the sort of weather system uses this same kind of meta sound graph thing. It's a way of mixing sounds, but also generating them. So here's I'll stop talking over this, but you can kind of hear what's going on, and then I'll explain each part as we see them. So each time you start this thing, it's going to be randomized slightly differently. So the sort of same patterns don't play. You can set it up so they will, but I haven't done that. But this is all just sort of taken from watching a bunch of videos about like how to create different parts. So in this particular case, it's the sort of chord synth pad. And then there's the sort of bass line here, which, you know, you can switch individual volumes for. The kick drum. The thing that's really kind of interesting for a lot of this stuff is that it's all, it's built off this sort of trigger, right? So, where is it? Yeah, okay. So there's the main sort of trigger. And the idea is that you take an input BPM, so beats per minute, and you kind of trigger an event that's going to happen. In this case, I'm calling it main beat. And then you can take another trigger and take the input main beat and section it into, you know, like counts of 12, and then output an execution that changes the song, maybe changes the chords and that kind of thing at a different frequency. So every 12 main beats, you get one change. And you can do that to lots and lots of different ways, right? So you could like change it every 3 or every 6 or every 12, or, you know, like any sort of, you know, odd or even number that you want. And so it's a really flexible system for doing sort of synthesis. And what I've kind of come across is that most people tend to not use this sort of synthesis element of the meta sound system. Instead, what they're mostly doing is using a bunch of what we call wave players, right? You sort of, it's a thing that shows you can kind of mix elements together, but do it over, like do it procedurally, essentially, right? We're doing this kind of procedural noise making, and you can do it for things like natural sound, right? The wind and rain and storms and that kind of thing, but you can also do it for the actual music system. So eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a bunch of like what they call stems, a bunch of like pre-recorded wave files with different types of synthesis together, and then play those dynamically based on what's happening in the game and mixing them together so you get sort of more like exciting music, fast music maybe when you're in an area of danger, or relaxing calm music when you're in an area of like just sort of traveling through the world kind of thing. But I really like this system. I mean, it's got, it's not perfect. It's pretty much with everything with Unreal Engine, but I just really like it. And I wanted to build this kind of stuff out because if you're trying to make a game that people will be able to play and record their own videos and their own gameplay for, one of the things you have to like, essentially, you don't want to use anybody's samples, right? You don't want to copy anybody else's music or use even like a music pack, because at the end of the day, if you have a sample, I once had a game that I was working on and it got a copyright strike on YouTube for 6 seconds of wind. There was a wind sample in some sample pack somewhere that had been used in another track on another video, and the content recognition system heard that same wind, 6 seconds of it, and copyright struck my video, where I was just using it as for background audio for a game. And it's like, I can't deal with that. So I'm going to make all of the synth tracks, all of the sort of music, all of the audio stuff, both procedurally, but also like from scratch, right? No, I'm not going to use sample packs if I can help it, because you can't rely on copyright. You can't rely on buying in a copyrighted item, because other people will have bought the same item, and then you'll get copyright struck because they, uploaded their video and struck yours. So honestly, this is the right way to go. And, it gives you lots of flexibility, right? This is a really cool system, and it's, still a work in progress, obviously. But you can really play with that. Let's just play this again a few times, because you can hear that it's different every time. What I like is that it sort of morphs over time. So I'm going to be doing a few tracks. Obviously, this is just, an early test. But I'll be using my own synths and stuff for creating wave files that then can then be played. So, it should be a lot more fun. You get it though, right? Like it's... So most of this stuff is just picking from an arbitrary scale that I've fed into it, like you put some data into a table somewhere and it's choosing those scale items. Or you can use, there's this scale degrees, which is value on here. Where are we? Scale degrees. Help if I could actually spell, wouldn't it? I'm not even seeing it. Yeah. So you can see that this is, just a scale selection. So in this particular case, it's a major scale, but you can see that Epic have put in a bunch of different types of scales. Let's just try a different one, see what it sounds kind of like that, actually. That's nice. Blues. Let's go for harmonic minor. Okay, that didn't work out so well, did it? You can kind of get the idea though, right? Like it's a very flexible system. Go back to major so I don't forget. So there you go. That's the meta sound system. I think is a really nice way of doing things. So obviously, once I've bought a new synth, because obviously I need to make some money first, but I'll be recording a whole bunch of different tracks, drum tracks and guitar tracks and that kind of thing, and then mixing them real time with this whole meta sounds kind of graph. And then using that graph to mix a whole bunch of tracks together over time, essentially making a sort of procedurally generated background track. And hopefully that means we won't get any kind of copyright nonsense going on because it will be procedurally generated. People can't claim it, as a copyright violation. So there you go. Procedurally generated audio, check.